We have a lot of equipment going.
Yeah, it's tough.
I see John. Is Scott able to call in?
He is.
John is,
John is.
but Dr. Parker is not.
Okay.
He has credentials, but he hasn't popped on, so.
He's what?
He has the credentials, but he hasn't popped on.
He's willing, he may not be able.
He might have an early morning
He might be
Pardon?
surfing.
scuba diving, snorkeling or something.
I think they're trying to get a few things settled over here so that Mr. Moffett can see those.
Okay.
Petra, you ready? You ready? Oh, okay. I'm sorry, excuse me. Okay. All right, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Call our February 8th meeting to order. This meeting is a follow-up to our January 11th meeting. We have had a great deal of work done. You will see as we go through this that we now have adopted, embraced the Bluffton policy manual that we talked about a month ago. There have been a number of changes even to it, and I thank everybody for their suggested changes. So this is still very, very much working in progress. So we have the manual is new, and then of the two sections, both the annexation and the zoning, there'll be changes that have been made to that. So our format this morning will be the same as we did on the 11th, to ask Stephanie and Joe and John to kind of walk through. We have John with us, so good morning, John, and Scott hopefully will be able to join us. So we will go through the changes, suggested changes from January the 11th. Again, just a procedural thing. We have another follow-up meeting then on the 22nd. So that'll be, again, Tuesday at 10 o'clock in 2 weeks. It'll be a different format. It'll be in a town hall format. So our, I guess our preliminary goal or initial goal right now is to get as much as we can accomplished so that maybe by the end of this week, the first of next week, we'll be able to send out the agenda for the meeting on the 22nd so that there'll be ample time to review the changes that have been made to date through today and through the next couple of days, I suppose, until we really say that we're going to go public with the agenda. And there can be subsequent changes to that, but give the community ample time to review it. So on the 22nd, we will be here. Encourage people to read the material, comment, send suggested changes, ideas, concepts, agreements, disagreements, what have you, to Stephanie, or attend, or both. That'll be up to them. And we will see where we're at the end of the day on the 22nd. If we feel comfortable that we've had input and we have closure relative to these issues, we could be in a position then to take the documents to a first reading at our first meeting in our council meeting in March. If not, we won't. And we'll wait until we have some level of closure relative to these outstanding issues. No hurry. This is way too important to do anything to rush it. So we'll see where we're at today. We'll see where we're at on the 22nd in terms of what we do, in terms of the first meeting in March. And I think that was everything. Oh, John's first up? Okay, turn it to John.
Yeah, I won't belabor long. Mayor has outlined sort of our next steps and strategies of why we're here, but I do want to just remind everyone sort of the nexus of the purpose and priorities of us reviewing annexation as it relates to our zoning ordinance. As it relates to our zoning ordinance, these purpose and priorities were mentioned during our town council retreat at the beginning of the year. And that's really to review this process by which zoning can be established permanently in sync with the annexation process, and then increasing our opportunity for public engagement. That was something that we definitely heard from the community of increasing public engagement as part of this process. And then when it comes to evaluating the annexation process and particularly with plan developments, looking at specific land use regulations, development standards, and environmental regulations and how that marries in. And then ensuring that the timeline still remains fair and reasonable. Ensuring that the timeline still remains fair and reasonable to the community and the developer, or the proposed applicant who is requesting an annexation into the town. And then a part of that evaluation process is also to include fiscal impact analysis and any other things that would the town per se would incur as a burden to cost, and looking at growth management strategies. And so there are 3 documents that have already been alluded to. The first being the Town of Kiawah Island Annexation Policy. This will be a new document. And then following that, updates to our zoning ordinance, particularly 2 sections, the designation of annexed territory, and then the plan development sections will be 2 ordinance amendments that need to sort of follow this annexation policy. The final component of that is the comprehensive plan. Our town will be reviewing our comprehensive plan this year, and it'd be important that a lot of this discussion is married into that comprehensive plan document. So that's really it, where we are. The following workshop, as Mayor alluded to, in the 22nd will get us closer to where we might need to be. And I'm going to let Stephanie walk through the annexation policy, and I'll come back and sort of work through the zoning ordinance as the particular text that has been recommended as far as amendments so far. So Petra, if you can put the annexation.
No, I can't.
You can't put it up.
It was on my computer. I can bring my computer up there. No, I can't.
That's fine.
Okay.
For those of you at home that might be viewing this via live stream, the information is available on the town's website under the materials for town council for today. And if you don't have an opportunity to download it, you can do so, of course, after the meeting, or feel free to email us and we will send you the link. And I think people here today have copies of this information. As we had discussed, one of the things I'm just going to do is walk through some of the, I think, highlights of this new document that we will be presenting to council. I think the goal ultimately, and some of this is that we really started talking about annexation of this community probably maybe now going on 3 years ago at our retreats. And then of course, the reason why I think we're obviously here looking at this document is from the proposed annexation that we had, which of course is tabled. And after that process, staff had realized that we needed to make some changes. And I think through the community process and the process that we have, this is kind of where we're at today. One of the things is we start looking at kind of what other municipalities around the state is doing. One document that we really liked and thought was clear is the Bluffton annexation policy that they have. I think it's called the Bluffton Policy and Procedures Manual. And we were able to share this, I think, also with the group that's here today that also came across the same document. And so ultimately, I think we all both think that that's a good starting point. Our goal, of course, is to enhance the structure and clarity around our annexation and zoning process. And we hope that the documents that we have here and through the input from the community, that in the end we will have that document that we can all support and be proud of. So I gave you kind of a quick backdrop, the purpose of the process. I've talked about that. And members, mayor, members of council, if at any point you have questions, please feel free to stop me. Joe looked at this as well, so some of the things I'm not going to go specifically address, but of course, I'm more than happy to answer any questions or address anything.
Well, just as a moment, Stephanie, just to step back, before we get into the specifics of the detail, one of the disadvantages, we talked a little bit about this at our last meeting, of a policy procedure manual versus ordinance. I mean, what are we gaining, or this is an improvement? It seems like an improvement. It is an enormous amount of detail.
Yeah.
Is it something that we should strive, municipalities are striving to do?
I think across the board, different municipalities have different things. As I said before, our goal is to enhance the structure and clarity around the annexation and zoning process. You can look around, throughout the state and various municipalities. Some have detailed, really, the Bluffton process is one that I found that was very detailed, really, in laying out the process. You have municipalities that may have a half a page. They may reference the South Carolina annexation laws that essentially we have in this policy. This policy would be something that would be adopted via resolution, but within the zoning document, we will reference back to this policy. So the zoning document was adopted by ordinance. So any changes to that will have to be adopted by ordinance. So what John will show is that within the documents that he's creating, it would reference back to the fact that there's a policy and a process that you will have to follow. This policy and process, what we're doing is we're creating community involvement and input at the beginning of the annexation process. So the annexation process really is kind of a two-step. The annexation authority falls under council members. Planning Commission in this, they also will have a role in terms of looking at the zoning designation in any type of, if it's a planned development, and ultimately it follows a parallel track, or it could, where it then all comes back to council for approval. So we're going to kind of go through those steps. And Joe, do you want to add anything?
So approval by resolution
For this,
means nothing better or worse. It would still have to come to council. There'd still be readings. There'd still be discussion. It would be just like an ordinance. Are there two?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
it's one reading.
I think I would just reiterate what Stephanie was saying in that using this procedure, I mean, every town and city has their own procedures and the way they do things. Sometimes it's written, sometimes it isn't. Having something like this for an issue as important as this, where there's detail down to a granular level, which you're not typically going to see in an ordinance, right? But this is beneficial in terms of putting on the table, this is the procedure we're going to follow, and having full transparency so that everyone can see exactly the procedures we're going to follow and the standards we're going to apply when we're considering an annexation request. And it's getting down in this kind of detail is not typically, just generally speaking, the kind of thing that you're going to find in an ordinance, right? Ordinances are just not as detailed as this. I mean, honestly, the The PD ordinance is probably one of the more detailed ordinances you're gonna find anywhere, and it's only a couple of pages, but I think it's good to have all this, and this isn't all just the town's information. That whole first section is just pointing people to the state law that we have to follow. So it's an informative document, right? I mean, it's not just our policy, but it's just putting on the table, these are the constraints that we're working under, because we can't, I mean, we have to be in compliance with state law. And this is how we're gonna do it.
Okay, well, again, this is a departure, but it's a good departure. So future councils, future mayors, this will be a good addition to the governance of the municipal. Okay, all right, good.
John, if I could comment, I think one of the real benefits of this level of detail on this subject is, if we look forward, it is likely annexation may come up once every 5 years, 10 years maybe, and in the distant future, maybe almost never. By having this in place, with council changing, the population of the island changing, turnover and so on, they've got something to look at and understand what they should do. We don't do this every day. It's not likely. We won't be well trained in annexation. This gives us a guideline that all of us, the community and the councils in the future, will need to follow. I think that's helpful. We don't want to have to reinvent the wheel every time there's a new annexation.
True.
So that should help us.
Okay.
All right, John, are you controlling
Yeah,
this one?
I'm gonna advance sort of down the document. Just
Okay, we can go down to 4, or, start with chapter 2,
Chapter two.
yeah. Okay. So I think as Joe had stated, what this policy does is it blends the town's kind of guiding principles with regards to annexation and zoning, along with the state requirements. So today what I'm going to do really with this in my sections, I'm going to point out some specific things for discussion and consideration. There's there's time opportunities for you all to review this further and to maybe do some wordsmithing or suggested changes. I will point out that yesterday I did receive from the group their changes to the policy document. They're still reviewing the changes to the 2 sections that John will present. Their suggested changes, I have not incorporated them into today's discussion because I just haven't had time to review them. But you all have a copy. I forwarded copies to you guys last night, so you all have a copy.
Stephanie, when you say the group, who are you referring to?
Mara, Jim, and Tim, and Kathy. They reviewed
Thank
this
you.
and they submitted this. They're all here today, I believe. So that's the document that you guys have, and I just wanted to acknowledge that I did receive this. I just haven't had an opportunity yet to go through. So by the February 22nd meeting, the goal and hope is that we then have everything all together. One of the things, John, if you can kind of scroll a little bit, right. Can I scroll? It might be easier because then I know where you just have to kind of show me how to. Okay, great, thank you. One of the things that is a little different that I put in here, and of course this is just, again, I added this just for discussion purposes, is this section here that talks about pre-annexation agreements. Oh, thank you. And this may or may not have significant impact for, I'm sorry, John, Mr. Moffett, there we go, I keep moving away from the mic, I want to make sure you can hear me. This may or may not have any real significant impact for us. This is just something I added in my previous job when I was a planning director for the city of Spartanburg. And of course, it's a much larger municipality than here, so this is, again, it's just something I added in here just for discussion and consideration, but it's not something that we have to keep in here. We had a number of pre-annexation agreements that were signed by multiple owners that if in the future, if they become contiguous or when they want to annex, we essentially already had the agreements. That is just something I had in here. We don't know if we're gonna ever have the surrounding properties come to the town to be annexed, or they might. This is just some language I added in here for that purpose.
Steph, what were the circumstances surrounding which somebody might want this kind of extended agreement? I mean, just to give me an example.
An example is that there's a community that's just right in peripheral of the municipality, and for whatever reason, at that point, they have acknowledged that they want to be annexed, but for whatever reason, they may not be contiguous at that time. So once the time comes where they're contiguous, then the town has the ability to enforce the annexation agreements. Others could be, not in our case, but a lot of municipalities use sewer as a mechanism to annex, and it could be that they essentially state that if you want to tie into the sewer, you have to annex, but at that time they may not be contiguous, but they're tying into the sewer. So you use that agreement and say, okay, once you're contiguous. So it could be a number of reasons, or a developer could say they're not ready, but they're wanting to sign some sort of pre-annexation agreement. So there could be a number of reasons why, but it all can link to either sewer or the fact that it's not contiguous at the time. So it could be in our case, it could be very similar to Cacique, which Cacique was contiguous, but it could be a Cacique situation.
I guess I'm a little confused though, Steph. When it talks about according to agree upon terms, we just concluded talking about this policy and procedure manual. So what would anybody be agreeing to? This would be the governing document, the policy and procedure.
Well, there could be other things. It could be almost like a development agreement. There could be other procedures or things that you put into the annexation agreement, into a pre-annexation agreement.
You know, it's funny, it's interesting, and I can see how it might apply. My concern a little bit is you're sort of trying to anticipate down the road what might be the circumstances. And if over time circumstance changes, I'd hate to have us bound by some agreement that made sense 3 years ago and now it's today, and everybody thinks that doesn't make any sense today.
Right.
You know, you're sort of, I don't know what the advantage to be versus when you're ready, come and see us and we'll talk about it.
Right.
Yeah, I don't see any value added to this either.
Yeah, that's really the only thing, is just that if, in fact, you go ahead, somebody, you know, like I said, some could be like 20, we had annexation agreements that were 15, 20 years old. And for a municipality, once we were ready to adopt them, we didn't have to go and they get signatures from the current owners, because essentially the previous owners has signed the agreement. So that's the only advantage. But again, I just said I added this. It's not something that I'm married to. It's just an idea I put in there.
Good idea.
Because some other municipalities have that. The other, which is not necessarily new, but I think we've definitely have expanded upon this and actually added as part of this policy, is a feasibility study and cost analysis. And it essentially lays out the process and timeline for when a study is completed. Depending on the size of the project, it can be done by staff or it can be contracted out via consultant. And so what this does is it just clearly, I'm not sure if that, it just clearly, as you can see, add some things that as you're doing this feasibility cost analysis study, things that we're looking at. Oh, I don't know who I just entered in. I'm
So
guessing,
these
yeah,
things
Dr. Parker.
would be required by the developer.
Who's ever, yes,
If that's whoever's applying for the
whoever's
annexation.
applying for it, that's correct.
Okay.
Well, that makes sense.
And
Yes,
then-
it does.
And then 2.3 is the guiding principles for the assessment of annexation. So essentially, this addresses the why. Why is it that someone is coming to the town to be annexed? And then also, why would the town want to consider annexing the property? So essentially, these guiding principles, which of course may not be, there may be more additional things that we're looking at, but we've laid out some things, you know, for the purposes of answering that question, why.
I'm sorry that I've joined late.
That's all right.
Can I just?
Welcome.
I'm sorry. I have really terrible internet access here, so I'm sorry I'm late. But can I just ask a quick question here? What is the process by which we're going through there? Since I'm late, are we going through this step by step, or are you giving us a general overview and then allowing us to ask questions later? How's that working?
Right now, I think what we're doing is I'm not really going through this step by step because there are sections that I've skipped over. So I'm just kind of hitting the highlights, but then to allow you all to either interrupt me and ask questions as I go through this, or as the questions may pop in your head afterwards, of course, feel free to ask. Right now, I'm just going through the policy. Once I'm done, John is going to go over the zoning portion of it.
Okay.
All right? And so what I've done, there really wasn't a lot, you know, in terms of, for instance, the chapter 1, I did not go through that. I just talked about the goals of the process, which is to enhance the structure and clarity around the annexation and zoning process. So that's why we're here today.
Okay.
All right? Let's see.
Oh, but Scott, welcome. I'm glad you're here. You may have missed the first part. We have received, Stephanie received last night, we have a marked up version from the community that is not being incorporated in the discussion because Stephanie just hasn't had a chance to look at it. As a matter of fact, I'm just reading it now. So
Okay.
that will be over the week ahead, but it is not necessarily part of this morning per se. And they haven't gotten back with us on John's 2 sections. So the discussion is really centered around what's in your bond. Well, you don't have a binder. What was sent to you? If that helps.
Okay. So my question is, if I have questions regarding some specific piece of this puzzle, the time to raise them is while Stephanie is talking about them, or to wait till the very end?
It's while I'm talking about it or while John is talking about it. So on the manual piece, I'm going through that, and I'm now in chapter 3. But if you have any questions in 1 and 2 that we've already went through, feel free
I got
to
a
ask
question
those
about
now.
going back now to chapter 2, under the guiding principles. 2.3, number 1, no donut holes will be allowed. But in the 25% election method, as outlined in 5.3 step 10, anyone with 10 or more acres may opt out. Doesn't this create the potential for a donut hole, and how does that square up?
Well, right now, for us, really our only donut hole right now would be Cacique. And of course, if the Andolan track or the Ando track or any other tracks that would potentially create the donut hole. The 10%, while it's in real life, Scott, some of the things that you're referring to is a state law that we can't change. So I'm not sure if we would have, other than the undeveloped tracks, that could potentially opt out. I'm not sure if we would be faced with that scenario. Maybe, Joe, do you think of where, I'm trying to think, the undeveloped area, so that's only one owner. So that would be, right now it's only one owner, so I'm not sure how, they wouldn't be 25%, they would be 100%. So I'm not sure if that would be a problem for us, Scott, but what you're looking at is the state law that we can't change.
I was just looking at the process, because it seemed to me that, and I realize that this is not necessarily applicable, but if somebody they were 10 people who got together and wanted to say, okay, we want to be annexed next to the town hall, for example, and they were all different properties, could one person who had 10 or more acres of agricultural land say, I want to opt out, and yet creates a donut hole? And I think we all know where I'm talking about.
No, I'm not sure.
No.
And I would just add that, I mean, these are guiding principles.
Okay.
The creation of a donut hole isn't going to be a turning point, a fulcrum on which any decision is going to rest, you know?
Okay.
The potential for the creation of a donut hole is not just going to create a situation where we just say no. Even
Okay.
these are guiding principles, and it's, you know, no one likes having donut holes because for many reasons, but sometimes they're unavoidable. That doesn't mean
Okay.
that,
I'm just looking at the policies and trying to, you know, get them to all square up in my mind.
sure.
The
You
city
have-
of Charleston currently is a donut shop. They have 1,000 donut holes.
A lot of municipalities have donut holes, and this law was created some years ago to try to close those donut holes because, of course, for some areas, like, you know, city of Charleston, I guess the whole thing is you look at the color of your garbage can to determine if you're in the city or out. So for service purposes, having donut holes is not effective. Scott?
Okay.
But it does happen. I mean, and it usually is going to happen because of applications. One person is going to apply, the other is going to object or not apply. And so you have checkerboard or donut hole.
Well, in that case, if all the people don't agree to the annexation of the property, then that's what's required.
It's not required. Well, it all depends on which petition you're going. I mean,
I
if you
thought
have
with the first
100%,
petition, yeah.
or the first petition was 100%, so it's just one owner. So ultimately, we have 100%. If there's 3 or 4 owners, they all agree, and they're submitting a 100% petition, so you're not going to have that problem. As an example, it could be Cacique. More than likely, that's not going to be a 100%. If for some reason they wanted to annex, we're not going to see a 100% just for sheer fact that it's already developed and there's multiple owners. They'll probably come in, if they did petition us, it would be a 75% or 25%, and there's a process that will have to go through elections. There's a much longer, detailed process that the state lays out for those. So the end was a 100%. And so no one opts out at 100%. They're all supportive.
Okay.
Hence the 100% freeholders, which is property owners. Dr. Parker, do you have anything else on 1 and 2?
No, that's it.
Okay. We're going to go into 3, but a lot of the stuff in the first couple sections is just things that stated in the state law. So I won't go through that, but one of the things that we did include, so one of the things I will say, we're showing a public process. The state annexation laws for 100% tells municipalities, essentially government bodies, how to annex, but it doesn't address the process for the zoning. The 25 and 75% really kind of spells out, if my memory holds right, it spells out the public process. So what we're really doing is that we're laying out a public process for 100%, and we're, I think, expanding upon the public process if it was a 75 or 25%. So ultimately, the bottom line is whatever process you decide to elect or whatever process fits your application best, there will be a public process. It's just that the state, for their infinite wisdom, for the 100%, they just did not, they left it up to municipalities to essentially adopt whatever public process you have. We didn't really necessarily have that. We had for annexation, we had public meetings and public hearing, but we didn't have like a true public community process that
So
you
this
want
is,
to follow.
this is a change, a good change. But
It's a good change.
This is something then, so again, for future councils, they'll know that in receipt of an application, annexation application, there's no judgment exercised, it's just, it's noticed.
Right.
Yeah, it's noticed.
Which is what we did.
Yeah, and so this, this process again, is enhanced because some of this process was already required through the state annexation. It just wasn't required as 100%.
Right.
Is
Okay.
that, Joe, did I?
Yeah,
Kind of.
you're testing my memory too. There's one of the
John.
methods, the
I have it right here.
25% maybe
25, yeah.
specifically references public hearings, whereas the others don't. But on the other hand, I mean, ultimately, you do have to zone the property. And any kind of zoning, any change to your zoning map has to go through this public notification,
Right.
public hearing process. So, annexation, since you're changing the zoning map and you have to zone it, necessarily involves zoning. And this
Okay.
really just kind of acknowledges that fact and makes, clarifies that this is how we're gonna blend those two
Together.
processes,
That's correct.
right?
Right, because with 100%, you could just annex it and assign a temporary zoning classification, then go through the process. What this is doing is essentially saying, no, 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 we're gonna push it all up front. And then have it
Okay.
come concurrently to council, which
Okay, so
which would be the annexation petition and the zoning can
I
kind
think we
of come
left the
parallel.
door open for someone to petition for annexation with a temporary, without a zoning request.
Well, yeah,
then
but they will
that-
have a zoning
That would be
question.
unusual, and then you'd go through the zoning.
They will have one anyways, because if they have community meetings, they would need to know what kind of zoning they're gonna have in order to be able to have the public process to show their conceptual plan and all of
And I
that.
thought that was required in this, the zoning.
Well, is it not true that since we require, even if you don't want to petition for zoning change, we're going to assign you an R1, which means that that's going to change
Right.
the zoning map by definition?
Right.
Well, I think in John's piece, we did not automatically say it would be a R1, but if you,
If you did not, with the applications and the proposal, with the applications running succinctly, if you did not turn in one of those rezoning desires, then that property would go to our base zoning.
right,
R1.
To be that
Yeah.
R1. So yes.
but you do have an opportunity to, request a certain zoning classification other than R1. But then it would go.
Yes.
Yeah,
But if
but
you
then it would
don't,
go through the process.
you're assigned R1.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but then it would all go through the process before it hits. Essentially what we're doing, I think the simple way of putting this without overly complicating it, is that we're making it so that a clear process is established up front, and by the time it comes to council for approval, you're gonna have the annexation petition along with any zoning recommendation and comprehensive plan change.
Okay.
So, that's essentially how the goal of trying to, and if it's not clear, we need to make sure we make that clear. I think ultimately our goal is so that we are kind of not for funding, but putting everything ahead of it going to council for annexation. So it just could be that everything.
You're really saying, Stephanie, am I correct in that what you're also saying that whether it's a 100% ownership situation or a 75-25 or whatever the other cases may be, the process is going to be the same for both of those conditions?
Essentially, there may be some things tweeted differently here and there because 25% requires election, but
Right.
But the process in terms of the public participation process, we want to make that the same. The actual
Yeah.
way to go about annexing may be a little different depending on what application you're submitting. Is
Gotcha.
that, Joe?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so along those lines, can an applicant request annexation and they put in an annexation petition and then they request a certain zoning that is different than R1, and then it becomes obvious that they're not going to get that zoning designation, is there a process by which they can withdraw their application for annexation prior to the second reading?
Remember,
Because
Scott, this process that we're doing is we're putting the public participation piece before it even gets to council. So if the developer or applicant wants to do, say, a commercial, and during that public participation, they haven't submitted anything necessarily, nothing has gone to council for approval. So if during that process they realize that we're not going to be able to get that commercial zoning, they can just stop right there. They have not submitted anything to council for first reading, so there's nothing for council to have looked at.
I understand that part. Okay. Stephanie. What I'm saying is, let's just say that they don't get that immediate feedback that, oh, this is that the community is 100% against it. And so they start going through the process.
Okay.
And then when they get at some point with the planning commission, they realize that they're not going to get what they want.
Well,
and then do they have
the planning commission is part of the process up front. The planning commission essentially is the one that's leading the public participation process. Planning commission and staff. So they're going to essentially know, because ultimately the planning commission is the one that's going to be leading kind of the mayor. I think in this process we state they can create like an ad hoc or annexation ad hoc committee. There's the planning commission process. So our goal is, again, to have the public participation process, which the planning commission would be very, very much a part of that process. All of that is done in advance. So the applicant should know in full disclosure. Now, what the applicant could do is that they could, essentially, which I don't see why anybody would do that, but they could say we're going to take our chances with council. But ultimately the planning commission, when they're giving their recommendation, because remember everything at that time is coming to council at one time, the planning commission recommendation could be to deny the zoning request, and they have a recommendation in council, because council has a final decision. Everything that's coming to council is a recommendation only. That's the reason why we can do it this way, even though essentially they're not yet in the town. And so typically the planning commission can't act on something that's not in their jurisdiction, but because it's only a recommendation, we feel it's fine because they're not making a final decision.
Well, then this is similar to the county in the sense that the property next to us was applying for, well, they didn't have to apply for annexation.
Right, they were just zoning
change.
Yeah.
And they were going to, but it was the planning commission of the county, or the planning staff and the planning commission of the county that denied it.
Right.
But then they were going to go to council, and then they subsequently.
Because the planning commission is just a recommendation, it's not. And so one of the things I think, council, is that with the annexation process, essentially, that's what we were trying to do. But because we didn't have this in writing, we couldn't have the planning commission act on it until council had first reading. When you guys had first reading, that's what opened the doors to allow the planning commission to go through their process. We just never.
And now that's changed.
Now that's changed. What we're trying to do is we're putting in a policy, a process to say, yes, they can do that.
And once again, the first reading is only to make it
It's typically
aware.
Typically,
That's it.
Because you have until second reading in our case to make changes
But this is all
between
done,
the first and second.
This is all done well before first reading.
Yes,
Well before.
that's the goal, is to have this done well before first reading, and it all comes to council.
But I think it's important to answer the question, in terms of, even if it gets to council, even after the first reading, I believe that they could still withdraw.
Oh, yeah.
But this would only be applicable to a corporate request or 100% because, the election couldn't be undone if it was a 25 or 75% request.
Yeah, if it comes.
But I think if it's a corporation, one entity, a single entity coming in.
If something happens that they think everything's all great, they get to first reading, we do the first reading, and then all of a sudden, whatever, for whatever reason, things fall apart, things don't work out. An applicant, just like what we had with the last one, they could withdraw their application. You know, so before second reading,
Okay.
they're not under any
Yeah, that's-
obligation.
Okay.
All right. And then the last thing I think, the last thing I'll really kind of hit on for the most part is this is more, of course, procedural, which is just talking about the submittals. We're just showing you everything that we can think of, and could be, you know, things that I'll have Mr. Taylor and, you know, look at this. But this is essentially everything that he would need, you know, planning commission need, ultimately council would need. There's things that's required through the state law that must be submitted with annexation petitions. So that's all that this is laying out. And then the other pages, which I thought was really great.
I'm sorry, Stephanie.
Did someone say something? Oh.
Just to go back now.
Yeah.
One of the concerns that we had last fall was the absence of information, and we talked about that. We got the process started. But in this particular case, when the developer would walk in and see John Taylor and say, "Hi, I'm
Right.
thinking of, I'd like to annex zone, whatever," you just give him this shopping list. They have to complete this before it even gets started.
And some of the things, yeah,
Is
I
that
think
correct?
some of the
Yes, that
things,
sounds
for the most
right.
part, yes. And some of the things in here, yeah, I think most everything in here is going to relate to what John is going to need or what is needed for the annexation.
So before it even,
Petition.
before the community at large, you know, before we publicize it or we notice it and we say, you know, that this is happening, this should be complete.
Right.
So, I mean, there may be things, a part of this list that may not be already included as far as before the community may know, based on those community workshops that we've tried to go through the process. But as far as the staff reviews of the complete application, we will need all of these
All right.
documents in place.
All right.
It's sort of what we have in here, what a lot of jurisdictions do. They call it pre-application meetings with typically the planning staff. And with the pre-application meetings, essentially, no, it's not, the public, you know, doesn't know, they're not invited. It's just essentially petitioner or applicant coming and saying, I think I want to annex, what's required. Planning staff would sit down with them. They can hand them this, we have this available on our website, whatever that final document is. They would sit down with John. John would say, these are all the things that we need. Because at that point, we don't have an application. They then would go back, they would look at everything, and then when they submit everything and John determines that their application is final, then it becomes an actual public document. Okay, and then last, for my piece, which I think is which I really like, is it really talks about, depending on what petition you're submitting to the town, 100%, 75%, or 25%, it walks you through the steps. Clearly, everyone would know from the
Right.
applicant, staff, and the public, the process that's required. And then we have here the 75%, says freeholders, which is just property owners, walks you through that
25%.
process. And again, this, for the most part, with a little bit of stuff, you know, additional things that we would require is taken strictly from the South Carolina annexation policy. This is a 25%, that is more detailed. And then one of the things that I liked was just some sample letters, clearly just show what we have to do as staff or what's required. So that is all for my piece. And I believe there's a lot here, so I'm guessing he's.
Well, just, again, I understand this is Bluffton's, but
Just kind of rolling through.
step 5.
Step 5.
Step 5.
Step 5, and what page are you on?
Page 10. So
Okay.
whether it's this town council or this mayor, or certainly future town councils and future mayors, there is some judgment that's exercised. We will consider the applicant's intent to annex. To review the intent to annex, initiate. So all a mayor or a town council is doing is just setting up an annexation,
If you
there
like.
really isn't judgment exercise.
Right.
I'm getting it in my head now. It's setting up this annexation ad hoc committee. It's informing the public of the preliminary steps, cost, da-da-da-da-da. Okay.
Yeah, just essentially, once the application is a public, public document, meaning they submit everything, we let you know at a council meeting, you can say, we've received a petition for intent, and then we can go through, these are the steps, this is the process. You can set up an ad hoc committee, you can say there's gonna be public meetings, these are the dates of the public meetings.
So if our neighbor next door wants to build his putt-putt and goes through this, then,
Well, he's not in the town, so he wouldn't go fit our
Oh.
policy.
Finish.
So our neighbor next door, if he's part of the town, but he's already annexed.
no,
I think what you're getting, I mean,
I'm trying to get to the point that what judgment does the mayor and the council exercise to an individual? He would have come to the town versus the county, let's just say.
Yeah.
And everybody's opposed to it. I'm opposed to it. The council's opposed to it. But we're not exercising judgment. We're setting up an annexation ad hoc committee.
But now I'm getting confused because you're saying you're opposed to it, because you're using him. Are you talking about, like, let's use the Andel track, because it's
Well,
undeveloped.
no, I don't want
and
to
it's
use
in the
Ann, I'm
county.
sorry. But
Or
let's,
just use across the street, just somebody.
our putt-putt, the miniature golf.
But he's in,
He's outside.
he's in the county, that's what's confusing. You're saying if he wanted to come into the town?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes. So he goes through, and he owns it, so he's 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes through to John, and John gives him the shopping list, and he completes the shopping list. I'm just on step 5.
Right, no problem.
So now I would be, the mayor or the town council, we'd be considering the applicant's intent to annex. And then we would set up an annexation ad hoc committee. Again,
Mm-hmm. You
we're all,
could.
we're all,
You could, you may, you don't have to. This doesn't state that you must.
Yeah.
You could if you wanted to, because ultimately, and I just see an error here. Because ultimately, as you see through the steps, it eventually goes to the planning commission. But if you want to set up an annexation ad hoc committee that would work with the planning commission, you could. It just depends on
I'm just trying to get to the point that I understand what judgment is exercised and where it's exercised. So at that particular point, the fact that we, the community, everybody is opposed to a miniature golf, we could stop it then.
Well, you basically, you say,
Yeah,
listen, we have no interest in this.
Oh.
The
Yeah.
petitioner then.
It doesn't even have to start through this process. And I mean, you use an example where we already know that as council, or at least this current council, we can't say future councils,
Right.
would oppose that use. So if that owner came to us and want to be annexed, and they tell us we want the miniature golf, we would say right then, before it probably even hit the process, this is going to be an uphill battle. If, and you would probably talk with them. We can't support this.
Okay.
So
Now move on to Andel.
Yeah.
So that would go through, we would say, we do want it to give it a fair hearing or an okay.
Yeah, and then we would then start following
Then we
this,
would start
following
following
this process where we'll have meetings and stuff up front, 100%.
and to be clear, I mean, ultimately, the town has to agree to accept any of these petitions.
Right.
And they can,
Say that one more time.
the town, in the form of the town council, has to agree to accept these petitions
That's what my understanding.
by a vote, by adopting the ordinance that can't be forced upon us. And town council, I mean, we have all these standards to apply, but at the end of the day, I mean, it's not limiting town council's ability to say
Right.
no
Right.
Okay.
under any circumstances. I mean, town
But-
council can deny a petition request for virtually any reason.
Right.
But then the alternatives are other processes to get this passed, which would be the county.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, if it's in the county,
Right,
yeah,
if
they can
it's
go
in
through
the
the county and stay there
Yeah,
and try
that's
to
what I
get,
mean.
yeah,
In our case, that's what they are right now.
Right.
So,
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, they can develop, essentially what we denied, they can develop in the county,
Sure.
we have no control over it.
No
And, I mean,
control.
that is enshrined in the state. If there's one thing the state law says, it said the town has to accept it by order. Any annexation request, I think it's all of them. Well, there might be, you have to pass an ordinance to accept.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think only public property that's own,
Yeah,
town,
the
all that.
town's own property,
Yeah.
maybe by resolution.
Right,
I'm not-
resolution, I don't know. I don't remember, but I know that it's not as a deep process. All right, so again, I just ask you to just take some more time to look at this manual, write up any comments, suggestions. Come see John or myself, or we can talk to Joe. And then in between, probably by the end of this week or next week, I will look at the suggested comments that I received last night, and I will be able to incorporate those into some of the things here I think is, can easily incorporate, as I did just a quick overview. Some may be more philosophical changes that I will have a further discussion on, and some just may be some, wordsmithing or just some grammatical changes, but I will go through
Stephanie
those.
or John, either officially or unofficially, is the planning commission NERS tied into this? Are they get?
I've shared these documents.
Okay.
I've shared these with them, and I've asked for them to kind of give me their feedback, their thoughts. But before we go
Okay.
to approval, these are zoning ordinance changes, so they'll have to.
They have
Okay.
to be involved.
All right, good.
John, I just have a real quick question. The applicant comes to us and we say they're 100%, election, and we hand them this template that's 5.1 with all of the various steps and whatnot. Do we have a sense of what sort of guidance we can give them in terms of how long or how expedited or how drawn out this process could be? And I realize that's a really broad, open-ended question, but we ought to have some idea that we can tell them that, this would be no more than X number of number of months and no less than X this time. Give them a general time frame. Do you have a sense
Dr.
of what that would
Parker,
look like?
that would be wonderful if you could. You try to give them an estimated time limit, but you just don't know. There's some applications that can take a year. There's some that can take 2 months. It just depends on the nature of the community process. If the community process, ideally, we may say it should only take you 2 or 3 months, but it depends on how quickly the applicant moves and getting the stuff that they need to provide, setting up the community meetings, and then if we need to have multiple meetings. So it's hard to give the time. You can give you can guess, but then you always have to preface that with, it depends on the applicant's timeline of getting us the material, having the meetings, if we need to have back and forth. So fortunately, there's not going to, I think, ever be
The sort of minimum right now, based on our current zoning ordinance, what I would give for a standard rezoning is a 3-month process. And that's just based on the timeline of when public hearings and the readings would occur. That's sort of a minimum.
The minimum.
The minimum, and that's.
So the guidance you can give them is at a minimum, it's 3 months, but depending upon the complexity of the process, it could stretch out.
This would could extend that longer, but the minimum, I think, that a lot of depends on what the applicant, how efficient they're able to move when submitting documents and that kind of thing.
It's
But I
really
think,
up to them.
right.
It's really
I
up to
wouldn't
them.
say a minimum of 3 months because we're adding
Yeah.
a whole nother layer, Dr. Parker. I would just tell them that this is the process, and then they will then understand that based on that process, it can take, could take 6 months to get through from start to finish.
Well, there's no question they control the timeline on a lot of this. How quickly do they get the necessary documentation to us?
Because once we
That's why-
start our process, then we can easily say that, like John said, the planning commission process, 3 months. We have to have council meetings without having special call meetings. Those are 2 months. So I think someone would
It's up to
probably
them.
expect that it would take at a minimum, it could be 3 to 6 months.
It's up to them.
Yeah, that's all. We just need to give them some guidance if they ask.
Yes, yes, absolutely. John, do you need from me to, or you're able the ability to change this, or you need the mouse?
Yeah. Makes it easy. So in addition to the annexation policy itself that we kind of already walked through, the actual formal zoning ordinance changes are 2 sections. This first section of 12-79, designation of annexed territory. If you recall, this section really just kind of the scope of how the town looks at annexation. What you see before you now is the clean version of what proposed changes would look like. The red line version is a little bit messy just because we've added the annexation policy document, and what that document has spelled out as we walk through a lot of the details that I think both everyone, as far as the community, the town, developer, will be able to understand the process a little bit better. So the priority of this document, you see the purpose and intent is really just say, what do we do as far as annexed properties or petitions? And then really the second bullet in B that talks about the state process and who gives authority. So Part C, annexation policy, that's just that reference and saying, hey, as moving forward, the town will look at this specific document that's created and how we address annexations as it pertains to running succinctly with zoning applications. The other part of this that is important for us to realize, and this goes back to your question earlier, Dr. Parker, about the zoning designation. With these applications running succinctly, this spells out that a permanent zoning request can be applied for by the applicant, and that designation will be pursued in all of the community input and all of those planning processes up front before it reaches that stage of approval. And then just hypothetically, if a petitioner does not have an idea, they know they want to be in the town, but they don't know exactly the use or the zoning district that they desire, this is built in to say, okay, that new annex area could come in, however, it will be subject to that R1 zoning district.
Right.
And so that's really the bare bones of this section. It really just kind of puts a little better structure to our process overall of how we treat annexation. Is there any thoughts?
I just have one question. John, if somebody comes in, like D2, where they don't have a specific zoning designation, a desired zoning designation, does that suggest that if the annexation is approved, then they're going to just take their chances with what rezoning they may want to do at some later date?
Correct. The risk is on them essentially really now, because that they will accept knowing that R1 is the zoning designation that they will get with the time of annexation. So really that burden.
So even if before the annexation it was, let's say, R4, and they don't tell us anything, we'll annex it and make it R1, and then if they wanted to go back to R4, they have to submit then a rezoning request.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Because essentially they would be saying the public process is a little bit different, right? So we want to be able to walk them through that public process. The annexation component separates that without them submitting their request for a designation.
Okay. Thank you.
Conceptually, John, almost nobody's going to do that, I would think. However, this is a catch basin for anybody who thinks that I'm not going to ask and then I'll just do something else later. So R1's just a catch-all. I can't imagine somebody want to do it.
Maybe they're just not sure.
The reason I ask the question is if I've got a piece of property that's currently zoned R4 and I'm not really paying attention and I want to be annexed, I don't want the owner of that property to believe that if he does nothing, it's going to remain R4. He needs to understand if he does nothing, it's going to come in as R1. He's got to go back to get it R4.
Right.
And I guess that was really the
Well, remember though,
we would tell them.
Dan, I agree. Nobody's going to do that, but just want to make
You
sure.
got to plan for it, though.
You got to
so
plan
remember,
for it.
if
Exactly.
it's R4, it's only R4 in the county. Once it's annexed, it doesn't have a zoning designation.
I know that. I just wanted to make sure that we were clear that the person submitting the annexation request was aware that there will be a change if he doesn't say,
Right.
my desire is for this to come into the town as R4. Then he has to go through the rezoning process. If he doesn't do that, then he might end up getting something that he wasn't aware he was going to get.
Buyer beware.
I mean, I agree, Ms. Prigg, that this probably rarely will ever happen.
Right.
But it is one of those, I would say, as you wanted to catch all, hypothetically, it also, not hypothetically, it also addresses a concern of, well, the developer doesn't know exactly what the merits of the project that they want to do. However, it doesn't put the burden on the town of saying, hey, well, when the market is right, we want to actually go from this use to a more intense use. So the burden is kind of shift to the developer. Huh?
Yeah, I was saying, all my annexations I've done in the last 20 years, I've never, ever had where a developer didn't know.
Exactly what.
They either, they knew what the zoning is, they're doing their homework. I've never had in my 20 years.
I would say
I never had someone said, uh-oh. The only thing, like Joe said, they wanted R1. If that's the default zoning for that particular municipality, if R1 is the default zoning, they want them R1.
Yeah, we're really just trying to close the loop, so there's nothing that's left undefined, and that you know, even if we're not going to use a particular piece of it.
Stephanie, you can go to, if there are any more questions on the first section. Oh, sorry. I got used to this, so sisters, right? I'm gonna move to the second part, which is specifically regarding our plan development section. It might be easier if I go to the red line version to kind of call out some of those, so you can see where those are.
John, we don't have the red line
You
version
don't?
on the website.
Oh, there we go. That's my fault. Okay. Well, I'll call it out exactly where we are. This will be on first section on page,
1 of 8.
John, could you, instead of pages, since I don't have a working copy and I'm working off
Okay.
of a legal pad, could you refer to it by sections? Because I
will-
do have
I
it
will do
broken down
that.
by 8C, 5N, that sort of thing.
so we're in section B8, which is the development patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Hold on a second, I gotta orient myself. So really the only change in this particular part here is talks about the planning applications may be submitted simultaneously with the annexation application. So this part here, it just references that if there's a plan development that is being proposed, it can essentially be treated just as a rezoning and run succinctly with the annexation application. And just for an additional buffer, it references the proposed town's annexation policy that will sort of capture the process and how that happens. So nothing substantive as far as a change or anything. If we walk down to section 8, I'm sorry, section D, plan development procedure. The procedure, plan development procedure, we've already discussed sort of the annexation policy and how all of the community input is sort of brought up to the front. However, there may be requests for a plan development outside of an annexation process. So while we're doing this particular rewrite of how we look at community processes, just making a few notes of bringing additional community opportunity as far as the plan development process is what this is spelling out. So it talks about the formal submission process, and then it talks about conceptual plan development plans. This was a question earlier that Mayor raised. If hypothetically, if an applicant has a conceptual idea before they have done their due diligence of all that list of, and they just want to say, get some initial feedback from the community, they can just present something conceptual to the planning commission at any time. So this just gives them that opportunity to do that, but it doesn't say, okay, we're going to walk through that entire process. But there may be just kind of, I just want an initial reaction, kind of gauge the community support or non-support for an idea. That could happen as far as a conceptual presentation. Continuing, community workshop 4. After that pre-application meeting that was mentioned in the planning, in the annexation document, as part of the PD process, we would recommend that the applicant also continues to work directly with the community. And so this might be in the form of a workshop where they are hosting and just informing them of their plans, their desire of what uses, height restrictions, all of the sort of things that are involved in a plan development. And the reason for that is the plan development is such a complicated or complex piece of work because you're customizing your zoning district. So you're spelling out all of the details of your future development. So sometimes it may be easier to just look in the stock of, for our standard zoning designations, R1 commercial, you can see all of the standards in place. But as a plan development, you're literally creating all of those different standards. And so it's easier for us to get the community understand what all of those may be and potential impacts. And so we encourage that the developer would have those community workshops directly with the community. And this is not necessarily for the developer and the community to agree happily on everything, but really to engage, to initiate that process of those potential impacts. So the developer can be aware up front, these are some concerns that I might need to do a little bit more homework on, or these are some things that the community are looking for that would make the project that much better fit for the area or neighborhood.
John, I think there has to be additional definition here. I mean, community workshop, who, how, when, what would the format be, who would host it?
So,
I mean,
let me,
when,
Isn't that spelled out a little further down?
yeah,
Yep.
I didn't go to all through it. So it spells out that in the participation format, sort of informal, it could be informal, but the date, time, specific place of that public hearing process here, where the scope of the project is is notified, and the applicant would be.
okay,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't get past Don. I see.
Before I move on to the sort of latter parts where I go into some of the application requirements and the approval criteria, is any questions on sort of that first wave of sort of community input or process-wise as far as procedure?
When they have the plan development conference with you,
Yeah, so all of that will be sort of the before the formal application is met. So I will meet with the applicant, get sort of the details of their desires, their plans, and walk them through the process. Okay, this is where we are today. These are the things that you would need to submit as far as an application. These are the dates and times that are part of that consideration, and these are the people along the committees of approvals or that
Right.
I will walk up front.
so all of
Yeah.
those things they'll be aware of at this point,
Correct.
including everything they have to do.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
So I'm now going towards plan development procedure, and I stopped at E, the analysis of impact. One of the recommendations that was made is to spell out more specifically what entities are part of that submittal. So right now, currently, there's roads, streets, water, and sewer, those sort of utility services, but what was added is specifically utility service, fire, and ambulance as part of that process. Right now, in the application process entitled and requires that we get letters of support or designation or what's the other word I'm looking for? Letters of commitment of the established agreements between either sewer and water capabilities, or for example, they're required to notify St. John's Fire District of their plans, and so that's one of the required letters of support that we require part of the application. So it's just adding that as an additional detail. Continue on to the next page.
Wait, before you leave that, is the Environmental Commission or the Environmental Committee ever included in this?
Not directly in as far as a entity to that the applicant will go have to get a service letter agreement as part of the application. What we have considered is later, and you'll see later as we discuss, that there'll be environmental concerns
Review.
that where there may be reference to staff reaching out to the environmental committee for their comments or concerns, considerations as part of the entire package. But as far as the pre-application meeting and the initial submission, we wouldn't require them to say, can you go talk to the environmental committee before you, does that?
I think it's really important to have that kind of review before anything is done. I don't know if it's at this point or another point, but I do think that's important for all of our applications.
Noted. So I've continued on to page 5 of 8 at the top. This was a concern that we received regarding board interest to list out the potential conflicts that a applicant developer may have. And so this section spells out that as part of your application, the developer must list out all their known professionals as part of their project. So this would include landscape architects, engineers, construction consultants, that kind of thing, just so that there's a list of knowing who will be as part of the plan. Question?
Yeah, I have a question because I have this one circled. This is 5N, I think, list of all the individuals involved. What practical purpose does this solve, or serve rather? I mean, those are business relationships that the developer has with whoever. Why do we need to know that they use XYZ landscaping company and ABC asphalt company? What does this? How does this help us in our decision-making process?
In the decision-making process, it gives us just that list of all the professionals. Outside of that, it really doesn't have any fruits or metrics as far as staff. This was a community concern of potential maybe working relationships that they may want to involve, but as far as the staff concerned, there's really no need for an official capacity driven to know all of the entities at this stage.
And then as they add additional people, would they have to keep updating this requirement? You know, let's say that at some point ABC Landscaping Company subcontracts with XYZ Florist. Do we have to put XYZ Florist be notified?
We haven't had those discussions, but it does, if I kind of anticipate where you're going, it does add a level of complexity to the application process.
If it doesn't,
it seems an unnecessary burden.
I don't know why
it just seems
you even have it in
unnecessary.
there.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
Again, John.
Mr. Moffitt, can you go again?
I mean, listen to what Dr. Parker asked. And your response, it would seem to me that if it really doesn't serve a purpose for this whole zoning issue, why would you even bother to have it in there? Do we really care who the architect is that he's using? Do we really care that he's using a land planning consultant? I mean, does it make a difference? I mean, do we have a preferred list that somebody has to be on? I mean, we don't have any of that kind of stuff. So I don't know why we would have this element in here other than just somebody wanting to know who this developer or who this submitter has as a you know, on his staff. I don't think it's necessary, to be honest with you.
Okay.
You know, one of my concerns a little bit here is, I know we're worried about conflicts, but I would think in many cases, the developer may not have any idea who's going to be the final successful bidder on landscaping or, you know, design.
Yeah.
I mean, they're at the conceptual stage.
Right.
They haven't hired anybody yet. Anyway.
At some point, John, in this process as a PD, the only things that we might have, because they're essentially have to create their own guidelines. So at the very early stage, the only person that we would typically have is the potentially the engineering team and the consultant that is doing the initial application and maybe some conceptual drawings.
Somebody shuffling a bunch of papers right next to their microphone.
Oh,
I
sorry.
think
It's hard to hear what Stephanie's saying.
I can't hear a word.
Okay. I was saying that the only thing, I was just confirming with John, the only thing at the PD level, essentially what they'll have is that they have to create their own guidelines, right? So when they submit their application, more than likely the only information we're going to have is the potentially the engineer that has helped with any preliminary work, and the planner or consultant that is submitting the application. So I do not foresee, as you had asked Dr. Parker, that once an initial application, maybe we just be clear, that once they submit their initial application, I do not foresee them coming back and amending their application every time they add a new consultant or a contractor. So in this case, it will be very limited. We're not going to capture most of any of their design team. They might have a design team on board at the time, but they might not. So potentially in our case, we're going to only capture 1 or 2 people in this process. And I think some of it is centered around local. So we have
the way it's written though, it says list all.
Yeah, and so what we may have to do is modify that. In this case, I think, and I think during the public comment on the 22nd, I'll talk more with the group. I think some of it is more of there is one consultant on this island who works with multiple entities. And the idea is that that one consultant maybe identify their partnership or other projects that they're working on. If this was an outside developer, the property was sold to an outside developer and they came in, it would be the same thing. It would be that one person for the most part. At the time this application is submitted and they go through the process, again, they might have their design team, they might not, and they'll probably have their engineer team. But I see what you're saying. It does say a list, but at the time the application is submitted, they will submit to us their list. Their list could be very limited because they don't have their team together.
Why do we need to have that?
So Stephanie, let's take that one consultant that everybody knows who you're talking about. Suppose he's working for the partners, and he's working for the Goodwin family, and he's working for the resort, and one of those entities submits a request here, and they list him as a consultant. Why do we care that he may have a relationship with someone else? Because you have to somewhat assume that if he's working for entity A, he has entity A's interests at heart. He's a professional. That's what he's doing. I don't know why we care. To me, it would be incumbent on the person submitting this application to make sure they've got a consultant that doesn't have a conflict of interest with what they're trying to do. I just don't understand why we would be concerned with who those folks are.
I would go back to why are we asking for this information? How are we using it?
Yeah, we wouldn't necessarily would not. I can't think of anything right now. Maybe in the next week we can flesh that out, but right now it would not have any real significance for us to know, with the exception of if that particular project that they're working on that we're reviewing at the time has posed any potential conflict in anything else or any other work that is being done on the island. It wouldn't be a conflict. It may just be something that we would want to know about.
I think that's the key. To me, this is just simply disclosure. This isn't an attestation. We're not asking anybody to sign off on a document that says that they do or don't have a conflict of interest.
Right.
I think that really would be not an appropriate rule. However, years from now, councils and mayors and communities and things like that change, and no one has this familial knowledge about everything. I think it's a responsible position. We want to know who you have working on this stuff. I don't just have any problem with having them disclose it. And again, what we do with it, it's like everything else. It's disclosed. They have to.
It's disclosed. It may not be a basis for denying the application.
Right,
it may just
correct.
be for our purposes. It's disclosed, and we might have a question on another project that they're working on that we might feel may have impact the project that we're reviewing, but it may not have any reference to us denying the application. It may just give us some additional insight on, well, if you're working on X project, but again, too, whoever does the work, it could be that there could be things through it may be so early that they can't disclose the information publicly anyway. So
understood.
There could be opportunities that we might not know, but if they can, or if they could, we can say, okay, well, if this project is going on and we're reviewing this project, have we thought about traffic issues? Because now we can have them sort of relate both projects, even though technically we shouldn't and cannot review a project that's not officially under review by us.
I think this is overreach. I really do. I mean, we've said that if they disclose this, that we will do nothing with the information. Well, if you're not going to do anything with it, then why do you want it disclosed? If it serves no purpose, why have it?
Why, yes.
Well,
No,
we could
in
do
the
something with the information, just a good part. We could do something with the information. It's just that it could just give us insight potentially on any other projects that they're working on. And so if we're thinking about infrastructure, we're able to take all the projects, well, we're able to look at the current project that's under review and make a decision based on looking at infrastructure needs or traffic impact needs. But
One of the things I
ultimately-
learned, one of the things I learned very early on in my career in laboratory medicine is I would advise other physicians, if you're not going to act upon the result of the test, then don't order it. Save the patient the time, aggravation, and expense. Just don't order it if you're not going to do anything with it. And this is in that category, in my opinion. Now, I don't want to dwell on it any longer because it's not worth all the expenditure that we've had on this, but I just put my 2 cents in.
Okay.
We can work, I think we should work on this a little bit. I can understand both of your points, John and Scott. I think a little bit of knowledge about who you might be employing today to work on some of these we could help them. For example, we use a traffic engineering study firm commonly because they have a database we all use.
Right.
That's a useful thing. We could help suggest. Let's work on this section a little bit more. I think there is some value, but I think you're right. We're probably overreaching. If we said we need to know every contractor you're ever, hell, I don't know who I'm going to hire. I don't even know if I can develop it at this point, right?
Right.
I'm applying.
All right, we can work on that.
Let's work on it.
Okay. Continuing just to the next page, we're going to go to the approval criteria.
Hold on.
Oh,
I'm not done.
okay.
I'm not done nitpicking yet.
Okay.
We get to a piece where in K, subsection 7, D and E, about protecting the health, safety, and general welfare of the public and significant adverse impacts on natural environment, yada, yada, yada. These are all wonderfully sounding ideas and concepts, but what are the criteria and who gets to judge? Because the sad fact of the matter is that, you know, whether or not something has an adverse impact on the environment clearly depends upon who you ask. If you ask the developers, no way on God's green earth does this impact the environment in any form, shape, or fashion. And if you ask the Coastal Conservancy League, they've got a totally different opinion. And so I just want to know who sets those criteria and who judges them?
So,
or is this just, once again, filler?
So the approval criteria is twofold. So once this development application has gone through the community process and gone through the public hearings, the Planning Commission will review the approval criteria for their recommendation to council, and council will use the same criteria to make their ultimate final decision on the application. So the two bodies that will use this approval criteria are going to be the Planning Commission and council as their determinations. As part of the application, as part of their requirements, the developer or applicant will need to address these criteria in their application. So the plan if you look at criteria A, the plan development plan complies with the standards contained in this article. Criteria B, the development is consistent with the comprehensive plan and other adopted policy documents. The applicant will need to put together as part of their letter of intent how they feel that their application meets those criteria and the like, continuing down. And so as part of the additions, there's only 3 criteria for approval right now as it is today in the ordinance, which is A, B, and C. So D and E are additions based on some of the community input that we've engaged with. Criteria D, where it says the development will protect health, safety, and general welfare of the public. That's an addition. It's kind of already inherently built into the purposes of the zoning ordinance and the comprehensive plan. So it is somewhat duplicative from staff's perspective, but it speaks directly to some of the concerns, outreach of the community. So we put it as part of this process. I mean, part of the additional criteria to kind of spell it out. The final point, E, I think it's worth the discussion of having with you all and how this is sort of applied an evaluation. Like I said, the developer or
Right.
the applicant will need to spell out how they address each of these criteria. Overall, when you look at criteria E, the development will not result in significant adverse impacts on the natural environment, air, water, noise, stormwater, etc. The technical requirement documents may not always address each of those individually, but however, there will be necessary purview for the Planning Commission and Town Council to have some flexibility in how they interpret that. So that might be something where this body discusses how do we feel specifically about any of those particular call-outs of air, water, noise, and stormwater. To Councilmember Connolly, to her question earlier about the Environmental Committee, that can be an opportunity where the Environmental Committee maybe weighs in and says the natural environment looks like this way today. These are potential impacts based on this being an environmentally sensitive area. Could we look at doing these type things as part of this development plan? But overall, I think the council will still have to make that determination of how they evaluate. Anytime that I've seen a new criteria added, it's important that we sort of flush out today or during this process what the real intent of that particular new criteria would be. And so
And how you can measure it.
correct.
Joe, can I ask a question to Dr. Parker's point for E? And I know D, it's essentially through municipalities, we have to protect the health, safety, welfare of the public. So that we can discuss, maybe debate. But if it should be included there. But E, one of the things that I have a question, I think Dr. Parker is asking, is it says development will not, which is almost stating that if someone claims that all of a sudden the air is no longer, it's creating a pollutant in the air, it's creating an adverse impact because it said it will not. I think maybe if we may have to change that because to me that's definitive saying this development will not cause an adverse impact, which we haven't defined what, adverse, because adverse impact to council could be different, to the planning commission, different to the community in different ways. So maybe if that, I don't know how that can be changed or flushed out.
Yeah, I put it on my list. I do think the wording here is a little unintentionally a high bar here.
Yeah.
Development is not to protect
Right.
protect health, safety, and general welfare. Probably something more along the lines of the development will not unreasonably
Impact.
Inadvertently
Yeah.
Have a negative impact on
Yeah,
this.
D is of much more concern than E to me, because you can't ask a development.
They're both the same.
Okay.
They're both
But
saying
one's
you will
going
not.
one way and one's going the other.
They're both saying you will not. Yeah.
It's weird because the original ordinance has the strong language in the first sentence, only if town council determines. And usually, criteria are the criteria you're going to consider and whether or not you're going to do it. And so I'm not enamored with the whole wording of the thing.
I'm with you.
I think these things, you have to be able to measure things too. What does it mean? Like the
Well,
noise level.
That's my background. If you tell me something's
Right?
got has to meet certain criteria, these are objective things.
Right.
And these are not. They sound nice, but there's no way to measure them.
Right.
Well, I think of criteria as subjective things.
That's the difference between law and medicine.
Only if the town determines, it does seem more objective. That's kind of where I'm concerned.
Well, it's like the development, it's like the noise that resulted from the timbers equipment. They never anticipated that.
Yeah.
They never would have known that, that equipment was going to generate a level of noise that was.
Well, it may be, I don't envision adding a whole bunch of standards into here, but.
Ooh.
Oops, excuse
Oh, he saw something, a critter, I guess. Dr. Parker must saw a critter.
I just think that,
That's
those are
what he gets for
implied
going to the
already in the
Bahamas.
process, and we don't need to have that as a guiding principle or a guideline, because we've already baked all that stuff in.
I hear you, and I think that's a valid point.
So it needs further discussion,
Yes.
Yeah.
along with the other one we're gonna discuss.
But I think that's a valid point. I think that this is the end of the journey here in terms of the
Yes.
approval. And even if the language is redundant, even if we pull language from the comprehensive plan, I mean, this reflects an intent that the town council is going to go through when they're approving something. So I don't have any problem with being redundant and saying the words again, in terms of what a town council will be looking at. Again,
Okay.
it is what it is. I mean, I don't have much bigger of a problem with it. Okay, whatever.
But yeah, but I think we will have
We got
to
some more.
work on the language, because some of the things,
Yeah.
when you say will not, that's gonna be, no one's gonna be able to, based on that,
Yeah,
pass that
yeah.
definition.
Speaking of journeys, is that it, John?
Yes, that's the end of the two documents there as far as the zoning ordinance is concerned. So as we go back to the agenda, or there,
What's next?
the only other reference, like I said, these documents will be referenced to the comprehensive plan. So the annexation document, its policy itself, but that's just a sort of a reference in our comprehensive plan. So there are, let me go back to this and show you there are during council retreat, the beginning of the year, I referenced the
Right.
additional things that will sort of complement our annexation discussion as far as putting some technical things in place. How do we address future development where there's no direct tie to our Kiwa Island Architecture Review Board and some of the design standards? That will come, I think, after we kind of maybe button down the hatch on the particular process for annexation in our zoning ordinance. But some of the things that have already been discussed, sort of a landscape and tree ordinance, those things, buffer along the Kiwa Island Parkway that I mentioned at the beginning of the year. So those all fold into sort of annexation, if you will, and growth management type strategies. But that's sort of the next phase, if you will.
Okay, so as of now, we have adopted the Bluffton policy manual. We've made it our own. It has been shared, and we have red line comments back that you really haven't had that extent of time to review, and nor have we, and we have it now. Does Scott and John have this?
Yes, I emailed it out to you all
Okay, so
when I
we have
received it
that
last
now.
night, so everyone has a copy.
We have the two ordinances themselves that we have sent out, and we have not received the red line comments back from,
Council.
right. So what we have is, we have a combination of what we reviewed back in January the 11th. Okay, all right. So we continue to review. We ask the community members to continue to review. We thank everybody for their input. This is Tuesday. We see how the week goes, see where you're at Monday.
Yeah.
What would be your timeline in terms of when you would want to send out to the community at large the agenda with accompanying documents? And we should get as close as we can for the 22nd, because it comes a little
Sure.
difficult, multiple changes after, we get it. So like Monday or Tuesday, something like that,
Are you talking of next week?
next week.
We're trying to get as close to the 22nd, then it would be more like the 17th or 18th, closer to the
Right.
latter part of next week, not the
'Cause there's
beginning
2
of next
weeks.
week.
Well, we want everybody to have an opportunity to review this stuff. There's a lot
Yeah. Well, if there's going to be changes, I can get it out by next Tuesday, but there could be changes, like you said, between Tuesday and the 22nd, because there's a week in between.
Understand.
Yeah. But at the latest that we meet 2 weeks from today, so I will
Right.
shoot to have have everything published and out by either Wednesday or the latest, maybe Thursday, the 17th. That would give the public, 4 days to be able to review. And they've already had this document. There's not going to be, I don't imagine, there could be some significant changes, but.
Well, I'm not thinking necessarily the community members that you've been working with, because I think you.
Are you talking about to council?
No. I'm not thinking so much the community members you've been working with, because you have a dialogue going on with that, so you can exchange stuff back and forth between now, this week, today, tomorrow, etc. I'm just thinking of a community member at large. We want to give them the opportunity. Maybe they're watching in, maybe they've been following it, however. So we want to give them an opportunity just to be able to, they're not going to redline this stuff. They're just going to send you a note or send you.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, because this document that we went over today is already posted online for the community.
Our community members know what they're doing
Right.
relative to, okay.
And the information that Stephanie Braswell sent out in the e-blast, it did direct the community to the document, and if they have any
To the
questions or
website.
comments, to send
Okay.
them in.
All right. And then we'll see where we're at Tuesday in 2 weeks, in terms of, again, comfort level. And when's our March meeting? March first week, isn't it?
First week.
I think it's
So-
March 1st. It's March 1st.
It is March 1st, the
Okay.
very first day.
Okay. All right, so we'll see where we're at then at the end of the day, Tuesday the 22nd. Okay, anything else, Stephanie?
No, Mayor.
Joe, John, anything? Thank you guys very, very much. Anything, Dan,
I'm good. I'll be reading.
Mary Ann?
carefully.
I'm good too, Mayor.
Colleagues? Scott, John, anything?
Nope.
I would like to just give a shout out to staff. They put in an awful lot of work, and this document and this procedure is really, really well thought out, despite all of my nitpicking. I just think that I cannot applaud them enough for what they've done.
Thanks, Dr. Parker.
Agreed. Well, it's an important document. Okay, and thank you all.
You just need a motion to adjourn. You get a motion?
I so move.
Second.
We're in favor. We're adjourned.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. Hey, Steph.